Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's session, Maximizing Your Login Security with Identity Management. I'm Jared, the Director of Marketing for Cox Business Cloud Solutions, and I've also got co-presenting with me today, Dylan Bowders, who's the Director of Solutions Engineering based in Raleigh, North Carolina. So I'm based in Orange County. Still the morning here, and East Coast, we've got afternoon. So thanks for joining us during your lunchtime.
Hello, Jared.
Hi, Dylan.
How are you?
I'm doing excellent. Thanks for joining. All right, so a couple housekeeping items before we get going here today. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared following today's session. So just FYI on that. Also, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, chat them over using the Q&A panel, and we'll go ahead and get them answered for you. The Q&A panel is actually in your right panel, and so take a look at that now. You can ask questions throughout the session. So we'll go ahead and get started with Cox Business and you know, our cloud solutions portfolio. So Cox Business is a business that's been around for you know, about the late 90s, and really when you think about it, Cox as an entity has been around for over 120 years. What enabled Cox to jump into the cloud solutions business so quickly is in 2018 we acquired some technology and actually expertise through a company called RapidScale, which was founded in 2008 and has been an industry leader in cloud solutions globally since that time. But the good news is that beyond just the expertise that we acquired, we've got an incredible amount of backing behind our business that is a 120-year-old family-owned business that has a long technology of advancements in media, automotive, telecom, and even more recently in clean tech and healthcare. So another great thing about why we're different and why we can provide these solutions is the average customer satisfaction score that we're seeing is around 4.8 out of 5. That leads most other companies that range around 3.5, 3.6 by a significant margin. And we also are really focused on our application delivery through integrating DaaS, infrastructure as a service, SD-WAN, DR, and some other business and Cox Business Connectivity, which is an industry leader as well. You know, we really wanted to focus on, you know, helping clients by closing gaps in IT capacity and their skills, offloading non-strategic IT functions, enabling clients to focus their energy on running their business more effectively, and ensuring application accessibility virtually anywhere, on any device, and at any time. So just some key things that we're able to do beyond what some other solutions providers in the industry are able to do. So, but going beyond that, I did just want to touch base on the solutions that we do offer before we jump into the content here. Again, it's really about enabling secure access anytime, anywhere, and so that includes our core disciplines of, you know, desktop as a service, infrastructure, disaster recovery, security as a service, and the others you see here on the slide. Really about moving businesses to the next level of IT productivity and profitability, and then also built for unique challenges that the business faces today and to support ambitious growth into the future. So really focused on that. So now we're going to go ahead and move into the content for today, which is the identity landscape. And really what this comes down to, and what we're going to be chatting about is when you think about your users that are on your network and are accessing your critical infrastructure on a daily basis, you know, I think the most fundamental part of understanding, you know, how to secure your data is understanding who your users are and ensuring that they are, in fact, who they say they are. So what we find is that in many cases, users, whether it's business or personal, can have up to 80 different logins for different resources, and that could be for email, it could be for other applications, bank accounts, etc. And so it's really critical that as a business, when you're thinking about securing your data, that you're not reliant upon the user necessarily to handle that situation, but you're really thinking about how to handle that internally within your own IT organization. So, the threat landscape, again, becomes larger as more users get connected to more apps. Administration and management becomes much more complex for the IT team. But in addition to that, think about it from what we've experienced in this last year. From a mobile environment, it's made things even more challenging because you have users that aren't necessarily on a local LAN. You have users that are at their homes working out of remote offices that wasn't necessarily the case a year ago. So it's actually created more challenges around this. So before we go into, I'm going to introduce Dylan here, but before we do that, I did just want to bring up a poll and wanted to get an understanding of how do you manage your passwords. So Dylan, before I drop it over to you, I just want to ask the folks on the call, how do you manage your passwords? A, company provided password manager, B, personal password manager, C, save them in my browser, D, I only have a few passwords I use, or E, write them down in a secure place. So Dylan, before I drop it over to you, how do you secure your passwords or manage your passwords?
Well, Jared, thanks for asking. And if you could mute, there you go. Thank you very much. I have a relatively complex process for storing my passwords. You've probably heard of Post-it notes. Now, first of all, when we had to not work at the office, I left them all at the office, so I had to recreate all my passwords, which was a bit of a pain. But I put them on a Post-it note. But what's complex about this, and this is where the security comes in, if it's a yellow Post-it note, I use the word yellow in my password. But what's even more complex is you don't know where in the password I'm using the word yellow. So pretty complex. I usually share my passwords. Nobody seems to be able to get into my account, so no problems there. But no, seriously, I've been using a personal password manager for about 10 years. I probably have, actually, I know I literally have over 1,000 accounts inside of this personal password manager. And it tells me if I have duplicate passwords. You don't want duplicate passwords. It tells me if they're complex passwords. It tells me if they've been located on the dark web somewhere. So, that's something that for me personally, I've been doing for a long time. And when we talk to businesses that don't enable their own users to do those types of things or don't have a process or a program to manage the passwords that ultimately give the keys of the kingdom to their own company data, it kind of blows my mind because it seems really simple to me because it's something that I've been doing for such a long time. But I'm really interested to see what the results of the poll are. And
we're gonna go ahead and take a look at that after we go through this next phase of the presentation, Dylan, and we'll come back to it and see what the answers were. But go ahead and take it over, and we're going to discuss identity as a service.
Fantastic. Well, I think you've already set the stage that things are more complex than ever, and COVID certainly hasn't. COVID-19 coronavirus certainly hasn't made things simpler for us. So, again, you've mentioned that the average user has 80 passwords. You can do pretty simple math on that, but we'll actually give that math to you here in just a minute. So ultimately, that threat landscape, sometimes called a threat surface, becomes bigger. And as you add more users, as you add more applications, it becomes a multiple if you're not using proper password management and if you don't have something like identity as a service. So then think about provisioning users and deprovisioning users. Now it becomes complex times the number of applications that you have. So the threat landscape becomes pretty massive. And then you look at, well, historically, how are malicious parties gaining access to company data? And, well, no surprise, they're attacking in the most vulnerable area, which is the end users. Maybe because the company hasn't provided them tools. Maybe it's because they haven't provided them the education. But nevertheless, they're attacking where companies are most vulnerable. It's not at the firewall necessarily. It's not through email. Of course, it is through email because that's where end users are. But they're attacking where end users are a part of the process. And then most recently, mobility. Now that everyone's out and about, again, I didn't bring my Post-it notes with me, so now I've got to write them down somewhere else. And who knows who's walking around the house, or maybe I'm in a coffee shop, or all of that just adds to the threat landscape and the threat surface. So let's take a look at a diagram of what does this look like. Well, we've got our friend here in the center, and our friend has access to on-premises servers. There's applications hosted on those servers. He's got access to his corporate identity, which is the domain controller, and any applications that might be hosted and actually might be tied to that domain controller. SaaS-based applications, you've got public cloud services, so Salesforce and WebEx, and there's a ton, 80 potentially or more different applications that this user has to remember usernames for, passwords for, and in most cases, the company isn't really doing anything to help the user be responsible for this. We're here to hopefully change that. So let's do the quick math for you. 100 employees, 80 passwords. Anybody want to guess? Oh, there it is. 8,000 vulnerabilities. Pretty simple math. It's in red for a reason. These are all individual vulnerabilities that are probably being attempted on a very regular basis. And if there's a company policy and a way to enforce complex passwords for 80 different applications, then at least you have an improvement there. If you've trained your employees to be responsible with where they're storing their passwords, then that's better. But the fact that you have 8,000 passwords and you're leaving that up to a human to manage, it's just a matter of time. I mean, it really is just a matter of time before something bad happens. So the results aren't good. A disconnected experience is not predictable and not easily managed for end users. And again, the threat surface, it adds major risk to the business. So what do we do, and what's the solution to solve that? Well, we call it identity management. And of course, there's always as a service. So it's identity management or identity as a service. So it's cloud-based authentication, meaning that it's all managed in a single, very resilient, very redundant mechanism. And it's operated by a third-party provider. So you're not necessarily dependent on your local IT folks to be the point person for this. And it's focused on providing this single point of authentication across multiple applications to 5 users, 5,000 users, 5 million users. I mean, it literally is scalable to pretty much any end. Certainly any end to the folks that are on this call, unless somebody from, well, I don't know, the government is on and they want to, well, I mean, you can scale it to 5 million users. I mean, that's not an actual number. It can go higher than that. So the first goal is we want to ensure that the user is who they say they are. We can do that a couple of different ways, and I'll explain that in a minute, but we first want to make sure that they are who they say they are. And then we want to be able to control the actual access to the applications based on that user. And this gives us a mechanism to do that, where we wouldn't have had that mechanism very easily or at all before. And then we want to ensure that the access is manageable across complex environments. And a complex environment can be a number of things. I mean, it could be a cloud-based hosted solution. It could be a SaaS-based application. None of them are created equal, but the majority of them do allow for this, I'll call it a hook, for this identity management to be leveraged as an external authentication. So then what are the benefits of IDaaS? And we've kind of talked about this as we've gone through some of these things, and we'll go ahead and call it out. But according to Forbes, identity is the cornerstone of today's digital innovation. So if anybody has seen the social dilemma, it talks about really the social networks aren't so much providing you a service, they're providing an opportunity for advertisers to gain your attention. So really almost everything when it comes to the internet is about the user, the end user, and catering to that end user. So in this case, it's a good thing. Not to say that social networks are bad, but when it comes to business, when it comes to work, the identity is really where we need to focus when it comes to mitigating the threat surface for businesses. So we want to reduce the external threats, and we can do that. We want to centralize passwords and policies So it's not just we want to have a single username and a single password. We want to be able to enforce when the password expires, the complexity of the password, and how do you do that for 80 different applications? Well, as a user, you don't care. As an IT manager, that becomes your job because there's so many different applications. And then back to adding users and removing users. Hopefully companies are just growing and they hire all the best people and they don't ever have to get rid of someone. But occasionally someone will leave on their own accord. And you need not 80 different points when it comes to provisioning and deprovisioning, but you want a single point where you can go in and click, and all of a sudden all of those disparate applications will no longer allow that person to log in. So that's obviously super, super important. So what is the service that we have that we call Identity as a Service? Well, it does just that. It manages those user identities across complex and interconnected environments. It is built on Azure Active Directory, so when we talk about a very scalable, very resilient cloud platform, we're leveraging Azure for that because it's the industry leader. It's the most adopted, and there's a good reason for that. It integrates with 95% of the applications that we need to enable this single platform for. And it's also deployed easily and quickly. So we're taking maybe a week worth of effort to manage 80 different applications and passwords and users and adding and removing. And instead, we're doing this and we're implementing this technology so that from now on, it becomes much easier for the IT staff. But also now we've reduced our threat surface for the company considerably. So password consolidation for all passwords. It's available across all of the services that we provide. It's available across probably most of the services that businesses, applications that businesses have today. And inherent to the Microsoft platform, Office 365, Microsoft 365, there are a couple of options. There are other things that we can wrap around these options, but basic identity comes with a lot of the 365 bundles. So when I say comes with, no additional cost, I don't want to say free, because you'd have to pay for something to get it, but it's bundled in probably a lot of what you may already subscribe to. And then you have premium identity that you can add. So one of the important things on this page that I want to call out is what's called multi-factor authentication. Let's go back to our 80 applications. Some of those applications may support multi-factor authentication, meaning I need to log into an application, I type my username, my password. Well, somebody may read my Post-it note and know that it's dylanbowders@domain.com and that the password is password yellow. Well, if they don't have my phone and access to my phone with my face and know which application to get the code from, they won't be able to log in. So multi-factor authentication makes it so that it's not only something you know, but something you have as well. And that complicates the exploit considerably when it comes to a malicious party, and reduces, again, that threat surface considerably when you have not only a method of enforcement for a single username and password across all of these platforms, but then also that multi-factor authentication. And we're enabling that multi-factor authentication for all of those applications in one place, not in 80 places, because not all of those applications have hooks for multi-factor authentication. Almost certainly don't. So moving on, let's look at what we've done to solve our fringe problem, where we had tons of applications in different places and usernames and passwords. Instead now, we have a single login page, which we saw a screenshot of a couple slides back, where they type in a single username, a single password. The resulting screen would be the code that we type in, or a prompt inside the application that says on the phone application that says, do you approve this? And you can say yes. Of course, if your phone's not unlocked, you can't approve it. And now we have access to all of these different applications, Salesforce, WebEx, and the other applications that were shown on the other screen, SaaS-based applications, Office 365, on-premises-based applications. It's all happening because of this now connected experience and synchronization that happens between the cloud-based Azure Active Directory and your local domain controller. So let's take some math now just to really drive home what we've done to reduce our vulnerabilities. 100 employees, no longer 80 identities and 80 applications and 80 passwords. It's now one, and now we only have 100 vulnerabilities. No, we've not solved the world's problems by introducing identity as a service, but we have significantly minimized our risk. And that's really what we're trying to do in all of these different facets, is minimizing the risk as much as possible. So we don't just talk about and sell these types of solutions. We also eat our own dog food, as they say. So I'll hand it back to Jared so he can talk about what we do internally when it comes to identity as a service. Jared, back to you.
Thanks, Dylan. Appreciate it. Great overview. So yeah, before we do that though, I'd love to just take a look at this poll that we just did. Pretty interesting results actually. Based on the respondents, the #1 answer was that individuals write down the answers in a secure place. So, again, to reinforce what Dylan was talking about, this creates a lot of security risk to a business. Not only is it leaving your business security up to in the hands of users, but it's also putting that in an area where could ultimately be intercepted by somebody else and create some really bad scenarios for your company. So yeah.
I wish I had my video on when I saw those results, because my eyes actually they got really big. I'm actually a little surprised. But what I think what this does is it paints a picture that there's a lot of opportunity out there. This is a gap that's not hard to fill, and hopefully, as a result of this webinar, there's obviously the need. The need is pretty clear. Hopefully, we have an opportunity to help some of these businesses solve this problem.
Yeah, great point, Dylan. The other thing I've seen as we've worked with companies who are going through some of these challenges and unfortunately have been affected by in a cybersecurity incident, is one of the things I see commonly is they also share passwords. So not only is it, hey, we're using a common application, we're logging in with a common password, and that also can become a major problem. So a great thing to cover there as well. And just for those of you who are interested, the second highest answer was that I only have a few passwords that I use. With password managers, that was pretty low on the results list here. And so anyway, yeah, just something to think about as we go through that.
Jared, one point I want to make, and this is actually the reason I came up with that one question. I only have a few passwords I use. That just means the person is doing everything they can to keep the passwords as simple as possible, that they can remember them, which means they're being used. They don't only have a few passwords that they need. They only have a few passwords that they're using. So they're using the same password in multiple places. And when they have to change it, they flip a few bits. They're like, okay, well, the last one was this. The new one, instead of yellow, it's a green Post-it note. And at the end of the day, that's getting you by. You're doing the minimum so that you're meeting the requirements that's being put in front of you. But there's a much easier way to do it. There's a way more secure way to do it. And then it's not about knowing your passwords, because you have not only a place that you can store it properly, which would be a password manager, but you have a mechanism like identity as a service to minimize the fact that you need to have to remember all these different passwords, but you're trying to do it as minimal as possible. So again, really, really interesting results.
So what you're saying, Dylan, is that my password, it's password 1234 exclamation point, may not be the best, right?
Put it on a green Post-it note and add green before the exclamation point, and now we've done some good.
Okay, good stuff. So, hey, you mentioned, and I think it's critical to talk about this. So as I mentioned in the beginning, Cox is a very large company, and just to give you some perspective, we use this technology in our business to secure our network. With over 55,000 employees nationally and internationally, one thing to consider is that when you look at our network, we've got over 8.5 million active devices on our network at any given time, and a lot of those devices are sitting in areas that we don't necessarily control, customer homes and businesses, et cetera. So lots of opportunities for risk, and we find that identity as a service and identity management is one of the most critical things. I think if you looked at the stats, you probably recognize that probably 80% of cybersecurity threats and incidents are a direct result of employee or human interaction with the network. And so just something to think about there. Also, from a network risk and high risk threats perspective, we've remediated and actually kept from happening about 2.3 million high risk threats this year so far. And so it's common to our business. We don't see it as a one-time incident and done. We see it as something that's continually happening. And actually, throughout this year has increased over previous years because of COVID and other factors. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and proceed into questions. Summer, did we get any questions that came on in during our discussion?
Yes, we have quite a few, so good thing we have time.
Great.
So I'll just kick it off. Can you speak more to the security of IDaaS? Are we basically giving the keys to the kingdom over to one provider?
Yeah, I can take that one. Yeah, and I think I see the whole question there. To further the question, it was, aren't there some advantages to the humans keeping them in their own passwords? So I think there's kind of two different things here. Is there a risk to giving the keys to the kingdom? So there's encryption involved with passwords that are stored. Microsoft would not be able to decrypt the passwords that are stored in their cloud because they don't have the Kerberos information in order to take that data and turn it into something that's clear text that could be actually read. So number one, and this goes for most responsible development shops that when they store passwords, they use something called hash. So that if that password data was to be extracted from the provider, they have usernames, but they don't necessarily have passwords. When I mentioned earlier in the webinar about having a password manager that I use that tells me when I have information that's out in the dark web, 99 times out of 100, what's displayed or what was actually extracted is the username, which is clear text usually, and a hash password that can't be read. So it's not that I'm necessarily vulnerable, but it's also a flag or a red flag, in which case, if it shows up, I say, let's go change my password, use another randomly generated passwords with numbers, uppercase, lowercase, and special characters. I have no idea what it is, and it's at least 12 characters, and reset it. The last part of that, could there be benefits to humans keeping their own passwords? I highly encourage you to keep your own passwords. Don't write them down on a colored Post-it note. Use a personal password manager that you have access to on multiple devices. Again, that's being stored with a single provider, but it is also being stored in a secure method that has been encrypted to the point where only you with your password to unlock all of those passwords are going to have access. And there's actually ways of also giving access to, like from a perspective of a will. Think about that from a digital age perspective. You can actually give conditional keys to a party that can get access if you don't access it for 30 days or something of that sort. So there's considerations there. Pretty mature software these days. Summer, were there some others?
Yes, plenty of others. So
right.
Next, can you address how this works when internet access has been disrupted?
Yes. Well, in most cases, you're accessing an application that's on the internet. So if internet access is no longer available, you're not going to have access to the application anyway. Will there be some potential downsides if you're accessing a local application, you're using identity as a service? Probably. I think nowadays with the resiliency of the internet itself, with technologies like SD-WAN that we can also be a part of solving, it provides a very, very low risk situation where you probably shouldn't be trying to solve for those exceptions, meaning when the internet is down, versus situations where you're trying to expose risk to the company because of a low risk kind of exception situation. But it's a good question. I would say it depends. As an engineer, that's always my answer. But it depends on the situation. In most cases, that's not going to be a problem. A work from home situation certainly does add some validity to that question for sure.
Great. So early on, you mentioned 3 goals. Which of those is typically the toughest to achieve? And if you want me to read them off, Dylan, I have them in front of me.
Yes, please.
Okay. The first one was ensure users are who they claim to be. The second one was grant access to resources at the right time. And the third one was ensure access across complex environments.
I mean, okay, that's a great question. Not that the other ones weren't great questions; they're all good questions. But either 2 or 3. I would probably go with number 2, being granting access to the applications at the from the right place and at the right time. That's something that's not easy to do, especially if you're trying to do it across disparate applications that have their own mechanisms for control, if they even have those mechanisms. And one thing we can do to even further that control and reduce the risk surface is something like desktop as a service, where we can control not only with multi-factor authentication and identity as a service into that virtual desktop, but we can now control the company's data because it's not being pulled down into remote roaming laptops. And for SaaS-based applications like Salesforce, for instance, as it stands right now, if any of you have access to Salesforce or NetSuite or some kind of a CRM, you're probably able to go straight to that web page and log in from anywhere, from Starbucks or from anywhere. Now, if we've gotten past the username and the password, and now we're trying to reduce the risk of a malicious party logging in with that username and that password, we can also go into Salesforce and say, don't allow anyone to log in unless they're coming from a specific place. And sometimes there's conditional ways of enforcing that. But with desktop as a service, we can say, don't allow them to log into Salesforce unless they're coming from this desktop as a service source, just furthering the strength of that. So that I mentioned a component that I'm adding to the conversation to say that goal number 2 is a bit more complicated to enforce. Identity as a service goes a long way in solving that, but we can actually further that even more.
Awesome. And I'm going to combine 2 here because one person is wondering your thoughts on allowing Chrome to manage passwords, and another person uses a password protected spreadsheet to house their passwords, which wasn't an option in the poll. So what are your thoughts on those 2 methods?
Password protected spreadsheet is interesting. And yeah, we put the Chrome storing in a browser as one of the options, because I think when we were going through this, one of you guys, whether it was you Summer, or Nikki, or Jared, talked about that was what you did. That I personally don't like that option because it doesn't give me the flexibility of being able to interact with the data and having it available across all of my devices the way that I'd like. I can use Chrome on my iPad and my iPhone and my work computer and my home computer and those types of things, but it doesn't give me the control that I want. It's not as easy for me to go in and manage those passwords. I have spent a little bit of time digging into it to understand it. What I did as a result of that was actually delete all the passwords that had been stored and told Chrome to stop storing that data. I don't want it in Chrome. I don't want it being synchronized between browsers. To the prior question about giving all your keys to the kingdom, I'm confident that Chrome is being responsible in converting those passwords to a hash and encrypting them so that nobody else can get them. I don't like the flexibility and the manageability of storing passwords in a browser. So that, I think the question was, what was my opinion? So there it is. Hopefully that's good. And then I'm sorry, what was the other one? Password protected spreadsheet.
Spreadsheets, yeah.
When it comes to manageability and browser integrations and being able to take what is maybe a less convenient situation where I'm not using dog12 yellow as my password, I want something that's going to be more manageable and more accessible. So a password protected spreadsheet will work, but it's not very accessible from multiple devices. I'm not going to be able to use a browser extension to create my password and automatically store it in the spreadsheet. I might be lazy and not use the spreadsheet at times because it's not as convenient. So it's better than my Post-it notes for sure. It may not be quite as good as the Chrome browser extensions or some of the browser extensions that will store passwords. But it also, if I was making pros and cons, I could come up with some pros for that spreadsheet. It's just not going to be something that you'll find IT professionals and security professionals and cybersecurity professionals recommending.
All righty, I'm going to just keep going since we have the time. So is there a good password manager that you highly recommend, and is that what we should be using then?
Yes, I actually personally would prefer that all businesses strike up deals with personal password applications and offer them to their employees. I think, Jared, I think you had looked this up, and I think IBM used a program and rolled it out to all their employees, and it went really well. And I absolutely love that. If I'm consulting to a business, while it doesn't do Cox Business Cloud Solutions, Rapid Scale any good, and I will make a recommendation, and it won't benefit me at all. Although I wonder if I can get a referral link. Anyway, that I love that program. I love that idea that IBM did, and I think every business should do that. I think it's in the business's best interest to give employees tools to be responsible with the business's data. So I personally use 1Password. It's the number 1 and then capital P password, all one string of characters. I use 1Password, and I've been using that for about 10 years. It still does, works on Mac, works on Windows, works on Android, iOS devices, iPad devices. So it used to sync with Dropbox, and now has its own cloud synchronization. You've got a web interface you can use. LastPass is a good one. Somewhere, I think did you say you use LastPass?
I do. I love it. I rely on it. Yes.
So those are good ones. What I like about 1Pass is I've got a shared vault that I share with my wife. I have my own passwords in mine. Bank passwords, things of that sort, we store in our shared vault. It synchronizes, and she has access to it on her device. There's even a few passwords that I synchronize with the family. So my dad has access to that same shared vault, and my wife has access to the family shared vault. So it's not free, but I'm willing to pay a few bucks a month for that level of convenience and security.
Well, and to that point, Dylan, I think the other piece of this, and going back to our discussion, is, the less times, the more apps you can connect through identity as a service, the better, internally. That way you don't have to continue going back and swivel chair between applications. You can just use single sign-on and get into multiple applications, at least from a business perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, if I was to look at all the passwords in my personal password manager, I have maybe 4 or 5 between my business needs, and I have 990 for all of my personal passwords, because I don't have an identity as a service as a person. Now, if you think about, and most of you probably have used Facebook login or a Google login for web pages that aren't Google or Facebook. That is the consumer version of identity as a service. And of course, Facebook would love for you to use your Facebook login for all of the pages that allow you to use Facebook login. It's the same concept as what we're talking about right now with identity as a service, using Azure AD and tying that into all the business applications.
Great.
All right, Summer, were there any more?
Yep. Would IDaaS replace existing SSO solutions?
IDaaS is basically the same thing as single sign-on, SSO. There are a lot of similarities, and there are some other companies out there that offer very similar types of service, and that they're failing me off the top of my head right now, but Duo is one that offers a similar product. We've gone with Azure AD because it integrates natively in a lot of things that we do, and is very scalable and has been adopted. I mean, if you're writing an application and you want to tie into identity as a service or some kind of application, Azure AD and that form, that component is going to be probably the first one that you program for. So that gives us the ability to roll that out across way more applications, the most applications than some of the other competitors out there or alternatives. But it is very similar to SSO.
Awesome. All right, this person gave us a scenario of their business. So we force our users to use an MFA token with their password manager. We also disable all password saving in corporate browsers and use Azure MFA with SSO for all of our SaaS-based apps. Where would your service add to the security profile we currently have in place?
Well, every once in a while we come across a company that is doing things right. And while I'm sure there are things that we can help with, and I'm looking up here, reading the question again, just to make sure I got it all. You're in the top 1% in this particular area of being very responsible. So I would say, specific to identity as a service, if you're already using Azure multi-factor authentication and SSO, there likely isn't a lot that we would do for you in that context. So good job, thumbs up, and hopefully you're taking that same level of detail across the other areas of the business from a security perspective. So very good.
Awesome. We have about 5 minutes, so I'll just ask a couple more, and I know Jared has a final slide to cover. Do we need an IT professional to manage this service for our company, or could I, as the owner, do this?
That's a super good question, because there certainly are services where it's difficult for us to partner if there's not an IT stakeholder inside the company. I would say more than likely there is an opportunity for us to help you, even if you don't have someone internally that is an IT professional, because there are a lot of these applications that we're able to get into and enable this function for you. So I would say that there's definitely an opportunity. There might be some internal applications. There may be some challenges with enabling this service on some of the applications your business utilizes. But if I'm stereotyping, not in a bad way, if the owner is asking that and you don't have an IT person, you probably don't have a ton of applications. So my guess is that we probably would be able to help you in that.
Great. And we will wrap up with this one. We are a pretty small business. Would this type of solution still be necessary? What's the smallest size of business you'd recommend using this?
I would say it's never too early to start. I'd like to think that whatever the small business is, it's going to grow. And waiting until you have 20 employees with 10 applications, you're on borrowed time. I don't really think there's the smallest size. I mean, Office 365, we sell to 5 users, 20 users. And the basic identity comes with those small packages. So I would say that this is something that we would definitely want to recommend for really any size business, and start being responsible as early as you can, so that when you're coming up to maybe the budget for 21 or 22, you're able to tackle other items and not necessarily just trying to be responsible with password management.
Great, then we're good with questions. And Jared, I know you have one more thing to cover.
Very good. Hey, thanks, Dylan. Appreciate that. And also just wanted to say thanks for all the really good and thoughtful questions. Obviously, there's a lot of thought going around about how to best manage your identity, your identities within your business. If you want to learn more, please connect with your Cox Business representative, or you can also visit our website at coxbusiness.com/cloud. We also recently launched a new LinkedIn group called Cloud Q&A, Conversations About Cloud. And this is really great because if you want to come in and just have, if you have thoughts or you're thinking about migrating or thinking about other things in the cloud, you can log into this group. You can put your questions in. Then we have a team of experts that monitor the LinkedIn group and we can answer your questions and also provide any other insights you need. So check that out when you have time. And then also wanted to mention, please stay tuned for our next event, which is going to happen on November 11th, which is around data backup and availability with Veeam. And this is really critical, especially with everything going on in the environment, and then also around the world of cybersecurity. Data backup is more critical than ever. So please register with that. We'd love to see you next month. And again, really appreciate everyone's time jumping on today. Hope you have a fantastic afternoon and the rest of your morning for the West Coast. Take care.